Let's bring in right now the professor of Russian studies and history at New York University and professor of politics emeritus at Princeton, Stephen Cohen. He's the author of the new book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War. We're just having a fascinating discussion about Stalin and the terror campaigns of the 1930s. You were just saying Stalin killed
the gene pool of Russia, of the Soviet Union. About 50 million people died between his terrors and his misconduct of the World War II. It's amazing that Russia's accomplished, and I speak not just of Russia, not the other former republics, how much it has. I mean, it was the first to put an artificial device in space. It has all sorts of scientific breakthroughs. Imagine what they would have done if they had not so many excess deaths.
And Stalin was responsible for his Holocaust.
Well, not only. I mean, some people blame the revolution itself.
Well, but I mean, Stalin's terror camp killed far more people than Hitler did in his Holocaust.
More than Hitler.
Talk about the missed opportunities that you cite through through the book, that have led us to where we are, where we've got a Russia that is guided, it seems right now, by resentment.
Yeah. There are only two people in the United States who hold this view. I exaggerate a little. Pat Buchanan and myself.
Who was in the book?
Pat and I, which is odd because we're like the odd couple.
Right.
We're a lefty-righty.
Right.
But here's what happened, and this is not an ideological view. This is a historical view, and I observed it. I was there at the time. I'm old enough to remember it. President Reagan and Gorbachev came back close to ending the Cold War. In fact, when Reagan left office, you probably know this because I know in your book you write a lot about Reagan, but he wrote in his diary when he left office in January 1989, the Cold War is over. He believed it. He regarded that as maybe his greatest achievement. 20 years later, we've got, the thesis of my book is a new Cold War. So you have to ask, what happened? Why did we lose the opportunity that Gorbachev and Reagan, and to a certain extent the first President Bush, gave us? My thesis in the book is that Clinton blew it. He lost it. It was during the Clinton years that we changed our mind about post-Soviet Russia and no longer saw them as an equal strategic power with whom we had negotiated the end of the Cold War, but we now took the view that we had ended the Cold War like that.
How short-sighted was it of us? And I'm not just blaming Bill Clinton. I mean, I was in Congress in the mid-'90s, so you've got to blame Republicans too. But we spent so much money to win the Cold War. And then from 89, 90 through 93, 94, 95, there was social anarchy and cultural anarchy. Anarchy swept across Russia, which paved the way for Putin. If we had invested more during those critical times, we would not be where we are today, would we?
Well, you're one of the few Americans who got it right. Putin was the result of this. I mean, we asked, where did Putin come from? Well, he came out of this horror of the 1990s. By the way, at that time, Russian men were living approximately 57 years. I mean, that's fantastic demographic figure.
Yeah.
I don't know that throwing more money at it would have helped. I think it was what they decided to do, how they decided to fix the country. On American advice in part, they made the wrong decision. I don't know what they taught you in school. I'm older. But when I went to school and you were forced to take economics,
right,
they told you that when you're in a depression, you throw money at it. You get people back to work. That's what you do. That's what Obama's trying to do right now.
Right.
They took another approach, squeeze all the money out of the economy and balance the budget. And the result was it shut down the economy. Now, that's okay to do that in good times.
Right.
Good times. You want a balanced budget. But you can't say, I'm afraid of inflation when you've got millions and millions of people out of work.
Yeah.
You've got to get them back to work.
It seems so strange that we had such foresight when it came to Germany, in that we fought the French.
Yeah.
George Sr. decided to let Germany unite.
Yeah.
We embraced them. We didn't do that with Russia, though, Maria.
Well, you know what? I mean, I also think that at that moment in time, the country needed a Putin position. I mean, they needed that kind of power and structure put in place because, I mean, when I was hanging out with these, government officials recently, when I was in Russia, one of them said to me, you know what, we weren't ready for perestroika. We were, and he grew up in the Soviet rule. We weren't ready for what resulted in the wall coming down because all of a sudden it was like the mob. It was like the mafia running the country where there was all these riches and then the oligarchs obviously, were buying up everything at cheap prices and they needed somebody to come in and say, raw,
and Stephen,
this is how it's going to be.
Let's start in 1989, Tiananmen Square versus what was happening in Russia. Again, not going to be popular to say this at all. I was against what happened in Tiananmen Square, folks. But you look how the Chinese manage the arc to democracy, well, not democracy, but capitalism versus Russia.
Oh, no. It's a decision made, but let me say a word for Russians. 1989, they had their first ever national free elections in Russia. They elected something called the People's Congress. I was there in '89. I'd been studying Russia already 20 or 30 years. It was fantastic the way Russians responded to the possibility of democracy. When Gorbachev said to them, go out, you're going to have more than one candidate, vote for whom you want, go on the streets, campaign, debate. Some people think the Russians aren't capable of democracy. The Russian people are fully capable. It's the Russian elite that's not capable of democracy. That's a big distinction.
Yeah. All right, Stephen Cohen, thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's great to have you.
Can you come back? Because we have a lot to talk about.
The book.
Please.
Sorry, at our newsroom. The book is called Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War. Stephen F. Cohen, thank you very much
for
being in the studio today.